Today on With the First Pick, we're playing Matchmaker. Which teams are the best fit for some of our favorite players in this draft class? Going to talk about it today. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's CBS Sports NFL Draft Analyst Josh Edwards. This is episode 229. And because I know you're wondering, Josh, there are 44 days to the 2025 NFL Draft. By the way, a little housekeeping here, Josh, because I've been missing in action last week because as a middle-aged man, I had to get my wisdom teeth out. I'm back. I saw a few commenters ask, why is he so old and still has his wisdom teeth? Fun fact, I called my sister, who's 4 years younger than me, after I got surgery last Thursday. She said, yeah, Mom took me to get mine out when I was 20. So shout out to Mom for letting me keep my wisdom teeth and suffer in pain for the last week and a half. Josh, do you have your wisdom teeth?
You know what? I thought I did, and then apparently I had a bunch of teeth taken out at one point, and the wisdom teeth happened to be a part of that. So I
Oh,
do
well,
not actually have my wisdom teeth at this point. But
congratulations. You're ahead of
yeah,
the
and I
curve
was
again.
actually prepared with the 44 days today too, and you didn't ask me, so one of these days I'll be prepared and asked the question of how many days are remaining until the draft.
I'll tell you in 1 second why I didn't ask you. A couple more housekeeping things here because I know exactly why I didn't ask you. By the way, we're at the point in the post-Rick proceedings where we're going to be firing up 3 pods a week. So we'll be back on Wednesday and Thursday this week. We'll also have a rotating cast of guests throughout the draft. A lot of names you know, like Josh, and a few surprises that might not be on your radar just yet. So I'm pretty excited about that. Then over the summer, we'll figure out all the long-term plans for with the first pick. And who knows, Josh, maybe Rick gets fired. And by the fall, we'll be back to right where we started. So fingers crossed on that one. All right, Josh, here's why I didn't ask you how many days, because this isn't in the rundown, but I'm going to start with this for 30 seconds. Your mighty Cleveland Browns traded for Kenny Pickett, and I didn't know
Oh
if you were
my
quite recovered
gosh.
from going out to buy jerseys for you and your family for your new QB1, the guy who's going to take you to 2 wins next year. What was your immediate reaction? Was that even on your radar, Kenny Pickett going to Cleveland?
I think anybody that would say that was on their radar would be lying to you.
It was
You
a fun
know,
surprise for me, let me tell you.
Yeah, and of course, you were the first person that reached out about it. And my first reaction when I saw the news was, "Man, Ryan Wilson is going to love this because I've given you so much grief
By the way,
about Kenny
sorry
Pickett
to
in the
interrupt you,
past."
Josh, but producer Stryker's with us, and he is already crushing it with the headline. If you're listening to the headline on the YouTube podcast, Kenny Pickett, new Browns QB1 question mark. Proceed, Josh.
Yeah, so before I even had time to digest the actual trade, which amounted to a fifth round pick in Dorian Thompson Robinson, my initial thought was, what is Ryan Wilson going to say? And my hope was that you didn't get to it until next week. Uh, and then I would be in the clear at that point. But unfortunately, you messaged me very quickly after that. And I had to face my fears of Kenny Pickett now being. I don't think he's going to be the Browns starter, of course, but at this stage of the festivities, he probably would start. So
Yeah, there's no one
a
else.
lot of work
You
to
would
be
have to
done.
start.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
maybe
your
Kurt
team, you don't have any quarterbacks either. So
and we are
this
better
is just like
situated than the Cleveland Browns right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers are at the quarterback
this
situation.
is this is like the most hapless quarterback situation podcast that anyone could have possibly contrived at this point in the offseason.
I am very excited about the way things turned. My Steelers did not get a quarterback on day one. We'll see what happens. Producer Stryker threw out Jameis there, and maybe Jameis would be fun. But Kenny Pickett, welcome to Cleveland. I can't say that without laughing. All right,
Welcome to Cleveland.
let's get said like a Cleveland Browns fan. Let's get to the actual show here. I mentioned a little matchmaker we're going to do here. So we have some of our favorite draft prospects. And as we get through the draft process over these next 44-ish days, we'll get in, sort of dig deep into some names perhaps that you don't know, guys we talked to at the Combine, guys who shined at the Combine last week. Mike Renner and obviously Josh did a great job with that. So I appreciate you guys picking up the slack while I was late at watching soap operas. But let's start with the quarterbacks. And first up, let's start with everyone's QB1. I don't even know if anyone has Shedeur as their QB1. I have not seen that in the media-wise and haven't heard any teams that would be leaning in that direction. But let's start with Cam Ward. And we each came up separately, and we don't know each other's answers. So 3 teams that would be good landing spots for these players. Cam Ward and Striker, you can throw up these graphics if you want. Let's be surprised together. Look at these top-tier graphics. Oh, we're all on the same page here. So no surprise. Titans have the first overall pick. We both think Cam makes a ton of sense there. And I'm going to have to sort of look at my notes here, Josh, as we go through this, and you can fill in any gaps in terms of the free agency moves these teams have made because it's sort of coming in live as we do this. So let's see. The Titans got my guy Dan Moore, the former Steelers offensive tackle. Trying to think here. Let's see. Long snapper Morgan Cox. He's back, thank goodness. So they bolster the offensive line, and if there are any of the guys I'm missing, let me know. But quarterback is going to be a need. So they didn't go out and sign a Sam Darnold, for example. So Cam Ward still feels like the pick there. Maybe something changes in terms of trading down. If they like another quarterback later, they want to get Jaxson Dart later. We can talk about all that. We both have the Giants. I have the Giants number 2. You have the Giants number 3. To my recollection, they have not made any quarterback moves. And I had actually Seattle at number 3 on my list with the asterisk, unless they signed Sam Darnold. Of course, they signed Sam Darnold. I don't know if Sam Darnold's an upgrade over Geno Smith. I think he's a few bucks cheaper and obviously 7 years younger. So we'll see how that works out. But I sort of like the idea of Cam being in Seattle because John Schneider is always sort of a wild card when it comes to the draft or free agency. But we have the same 3 teams, and I think the order of importance is pretty close as well. Where are you on the Browns making a move for Cam Ward from 2 to 1? And also the follow-up, my Browns buddy was texting me this. Do you think that Myles Garrett can still be traded?
No, I don't think he was going to be traded. Even when he did make the declaration that he wanted to be traded, and still don't now that he has signed the contract extension. I don't ever think that that was part of Cleveland's plans.
Should it
And
have
even
been?
if should it have been, yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah. And I obviously Miles Garrett's one of the best defensive players in NFL history, but um, my reasoning for the Browns potentially trading up to number 1 um, is all dependent upon what they would have to give up. Because I think this team has several needs. And if you trade away critical draft capital at this point that could help you rebuild the defensive line, could potentially provide a replacement for JOK, could give you another wide receiver, tight end, whatever, because they have so many needs. Um, it would be very difficult to give up what they would need to in order to move up and get Cam Ward. At the same time, if you have a conviction in that player, then you have to do it because we've seen what a rookie quarterback can do for an organization with Jaden Daniels and CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams even being up and down last year. There's a lot of optimism in that building because of the potential that he did show in spurts last season. So I think it all depends on the compensation because I think Cleveland is farther away than maybe its own leadership wants to admit.
Let me ask you this,
Uh,
though, to push back a little bit. That team won 11 games with Joe Flacco in 2023.
yeah,
Are they that far
yeah.
away?
Yes, because it was 2 years ago. They've got a very veteran roster at this point in time. They already had an older roster with most of its offensive line, being up there in age. Jack Conklin, Joel Bitonio, who considered retirement this offseason. Nick Chubb, of course, is coming off a significant injury. Looked like a shell of himself this past season. So you can't count on not only his production, but just the kind of spirit that he brings to the locker room. I mean, you no longer have that because he's not producing the way that he had. So uh, I think this team is very different than they had been just a couple of years ago. I do think that they're going to try to get back to the offensive structure that they showed 2 years ago when they did have 4 quarterbacks leading them to a victory as the starter. But I just think that this team has changed for the worse so much over the past couple of years that as difficult as it was, I think you had to have considered trading Miles Garrett.
Yeah, I'm confused by the Myles Garrett thing, not because to you, as you point out, he's one of the best players in the NFL, but he is not the one player that you are away from being a successful franchise. Starts with the quarterback, and obviously Kenny Pickett solves that problem. I mentioned Dan Moore. They also signed Cody Barton, the linebacker, and they moved on from Harold Landry. Harold Landry ended up in the New England. Is that where he ended up? Do we know?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so he's in New England now. New England's done a lot of things. In terms of the New York Giants, another team that we mentioned here, I'm just going to mention some free agency moves they made, mostly on the defensive side of the ball. Paulson Adebo, the corner. Javon Holland, they just signed the safety. They
We're going to
re-upped
be here a
Darius
while.
Slayton. Who's that?
So we're going to be here a while. They signed a ton of
Yeah,
people.
they actually made a ton of moves. And it has to be, you have to feel good about it if you're the Giants fan. You just got to figure out the quarterback situation, of course. And then Cleveland, we talked about, they re-upped Miles. They signed Cornelius Lucas, the tackle. Kenny Pickett, we talked about in DTR, they traded as well. All right. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Cam because I think it's Tennessee is the layup, and he sort of created some distance. We've talked about this between him and Shedeur at the combine, even though neither did anything. But I think just solely based on the interviews and talking to people about how those interviews went, I think Cam's went really well, and Shedeur wasn't necessarily terrible, but I think it was more steady as she goes, not a needle mover in terms of the interviews. So we'll see. Jaxson Dart has done really well in these interviews as well, and I wonder if he's going to get some late steam because, I mean, would you agree that he would have been QB1 in the 2022 class in which Kenny Pickett went 20th overall?
Yeah, it would have been close. I did not have a first round grade on Kenny Pickett. I do not have a first round grade on Jaxson Dart at this point. So probably in
Yeah,
a similar neighborhood.
I
I
think
don't
that's
know
right.
which houses they were in without looking at the grades, but probably similarly graded.
Yeah. I was not high on Kenny Pickett coming out. I thought he was a day two guy, and I think Jaxson Dart's a early day two guy. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right, let's talk about the other quarterback here, Shedeur Sanders, who I just mentioned. All right, Striker, what do we do here? Oh, you didn't take the layup. You didn't take the Raiders. The Raiders obviously traded for Geno Smith. I do wonder. I had the Raiders number one, Saints number two, Steelers number three. Oh, we were the same in terms of the Steelers and Saints. Interesting there. I do wonder with the Raiders if even though because Geno's 34, if you just bring in Shedeur, it might be best case scenario where he doesn't have to play right away. And
Right.
it's funny. It feels like rewriting the narrative on Shedeur in terms of the things he can't do over the last 2 years in the fall. We just talked about all the things he was pretty good at. Yeah, there's the arm strength. He's not that much smaller than Cam in terms of the
No.
measurements. So that's one less thing we can talk about. He's not the athlete Cam is, but he's not a terrible athlete. So I do wonder if the Raiders make sense in just in terms of a landing spot where he can take his time, but that's not the NFL we live in. You mentioned Cleveland at 2 as your number one destination. They have the second overall pick. And then I think the Saints make a ton of sense, especially if Kellen Moore feels like that's a guy he can work with and get the most out of. And then also, I think they just restructured Derek Carr's deal. So who knows what his long term plans are going to be in New Orleans. And he hasn't exactly set the world on fire. But let's talk about my Pittsburgh Steelers. This is going to be a situation, and I've repeated this a couple times, but I'll bring it up again. Back in December 2023, I did a hit on CBS Sports HQ where I said that the Steelers at one time traded up from 20 to 10. I think it was the 2019 draft to get a linebacker, Devin Bush, and everyone's excited about it. Why can't you trade it from 20 to 10 to get a Michael Penix Jr., for example, is the names that I used at the time. Now he was already off the board in reality. He went number 8. But my thinking was you need a quarterback. Kenny Pickett wasn't it. And is that a similar strategy you would use here if you're picking 21? Would you be willing to move up to 10 and give up all that comes with it? Knowing that you don't have a second round pick as well, because that's the DK Metcalf pick, to get someone like Shedeur, is he worth going up 11 spots?
I think the opportunity cost would probably be too much in this situation. Because of what they have had to give up for DK Metcalf. Because theoretically, you would have to give up even more to make that move. So you're really depleting your resources not only this year, but future years as well. So I almost wonder if that would be a cost prohibitive move for them.
Yeah.
The Browns being on the list was more. I don't think that they would take him at number 2 at this point, but with potentially a couple teams off the board. Again, the Raiders are kind of the wild card. The Saints are a team that we obviously both had. I mean, it makes sense there with Derek Carr and kind of his murky future with the organization. Pittsburgh makes a lot of sense, of course, as well. But I mean, when you look through the draft order, there's not a ton of teams that really jump out. Once you get past those first couple of picks,
Yeah.
and if the Raiders and the Jets are not going to be in the market. The Jets are another team we didn't talk about. They signed Justin Fields. I don't think having Fields necessarily means that they would not take a rookie quarterback. I think you could still bring that player in and
Yeah.
compete.
Justin's a 2-year deal.
Um,
That's exactly right.
but theoretically, it could potentially take both of those teams out of the first round conversation. And if neither of those teams are going to take a quarterback and he is still available past pick number 5, the Saints are kind of the saving grace, or he's going to fall down the board a little bit.
It could be, it's funny. Shedeur could be in a Will Levis situation where once he got past Indianapolis, and there was some conversation in retrospect, I think Chris Ballard was weighing Anthony Richardson versus Levis. They took AR5, and then Levis proceeded to fall. The other thing, and this is more a Steelers-centric point, and then we'll take a break and come back and talk about some of these other players, is that the Steelers got over their skis in 2022, and they panicked and took Kenny Pickett. And if they do that again this year and give up draft capital, next year's quarterback class is probably going to be pretty good. And they missed out on subsequent quarterback classes because, they found a way to win 8 or 9 games with Kenny Pickett or whoever's the quarterback. But they were sort of stuck with him. Now, I'll give him credit for getting out from under Kenny in 2 years, but I don't know if that's a situation willing to go down. And the other thing to keep in mind is that maybe they like someone like Jaxson Dart a little better in terms of not having to overpay. And maybe we'll talk about that in a few minutes, Josh. But let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some skill position guys, starting with, my number one player on my board. Is Travis Hunter number one player on your board?
Abdul Carter.
Abdul Carter. We're not going to talk about him, so nice segue there. Thanks for that. We're going to talk about Travis Hunter right after this.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1. From sweet to elite to the Final Four.
All right. The NCAA tournament is upon us, apparently. I used to be so into college basketball. You can see it over there with my UNC 1982 national championship poster. Josh, who was your team growing up? You're not an Ohio State fan, right? You're a Kentucky fan?
Kentucky, yeah.
You've been throughout?
Kentucky, yeah. My whole life, my family's from Kentucky. But kind of like you, I've kind of felt detached a little bit from college basketball over the past decade or so.
I can't even tell you who is Tubby Smith still the coach? Who's the coach?
He is, in fact, yes. Yeah.
Who's the coach in Kentucky? I have no idea.
Mark Pope, former player on Rick Pitino's championship teams.
Gosh, that's how old I am, man. It's wild. Like you see actors you saw 30 years ago, you see players you saw 30 years ago growing up, and you're like, holy crap, this thing is going downhill pretty quickly here. Shout out to Mark Pope. Is he doing okay with the team?
Yeah, they're doing pretty well. He had to remake an entire team in 1 year, so growing pains, as you can imagine. But we're always getting those reminders that we're getting a little bit older.
Or a lot older.
You more so than me. But,
100%, man. No joke on that.
But I saw Donovan McNabb Jr. got an offer from Syracuse a couple of days ago. So, those high school recruiting reminders are just very, very constant this time of year.
Hey, Striker, is Penn State any good in basketball? Striker's fierce.
No.
Oh, they're bad. Weren't they good for a minute, like a couple years ago?
They made the tournament once and won 1 game, but outside of that, we just hang our hat on winning the NIT a couple times.
Hey, we all got to know our place. All right, shout out to the Nittany Lions consistently being terrible at basketball. All right, let's get into Travis Hunter. He's not bad at anything. Also a big fisherman. I didn't know that. You fish, Josh?
I enjoy it. I don't do it very often. Don't have a lot of time, but yeah, I enjoy fishing.
Yeah, he's big. He's a big fish guy. Pond, not ocean, I found out. I don't know anything about fishing, so he was wholly unimpressed with my ability to talk about that. All right, Striker said, let's get going. All right, here we go. Top 3 landing spots for Travis Hunter. I had the Patriots, the Jags, and the 49ers. That's sort of a wild card, 2 for 1 there. You had the Titans, Giants, and Patriots. Only one similarity here. The Patriots have done a ton, too. Let's look real quick and see what they've done. So the Patriots, Milton Williams, we talked about Harold Landry, Carlton Davis, holy Moses. My guy Robert Spillane, Chicago's very own, former Steeler, former Raider. Morgan Moses, the old-timer to shore up the offensive line. Austin Hooper is back. They signed Mac Hollins. I actually sort of love that. They got the Pastronaut, Josh Dobbs, former Steeler again. And then they traded Devon Godshaw. So they've got a lot of moving parts here. So I think let's talk a little about that, what his fit is in New England, because they're still going to figure out the offensive line. Morgan Moses helps. But again, he's maybe not even a 2 for 1 because they do have Carlton Davis and Christian Gonzalez, and maybe you even think more about using him on offense and just sub packages on defense.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating because the Browns have come out and said that they view him as a wide receiver because
Oh,
his
okay.
ball skills are what he does best, or his best trait. So if you can get him the ball more often, that they feel like that's the best use of his talents. Tennessee has come out and said that they see him as a cornerback, and for that reason, I put the Titans as a possibility because if they trade back and Carter is off the board, then I think they would be inclined to take Travis Hunter. But they just traded for L'Jarius Sneed last year. As far as the Patriots are concerned, I don't know that they've gone on record as saying that they prefer him at one position or another. But it is interesting because Travis Hunter really isn't even looking at it that way. I mean, at the combine, he was essentially saying, yeah, I want to give it a try on both sides of the ball. It's not even that he's focusing on one or the other, which I don't know that NFL teams are going to be accepting of that. I think they will probably try to stick him on one side with packages on the other side. Um, but I think when you look at the current state of New England's roster, especially having just signed Carlton Davis, as you mentioned, I would think that they prefer him as a wide receiver. And if you can just keep giving Drake May help at the wide receiver position, which they desperately need, I think that's a win all day for them. And they've been a very popular link to Travis Hunter throughout this entire process.
Yeah, Mike Vrabel's back-ish. It feels like there's a new pep in their step, and after how things sort of went sideways last year. So we shall see. But I like the idea. This is really sort of the first time we've talked about Travis Hunter primarily as a wide receiver, and that fits for what they have there in New England. All right, next up,
Wasn't it Troy Brown that played both sides of the ball too for the Patriots at
One-
one point throughout his career? One of those defensive backs did for the Patriots, so that would
he
be
did.
kind of an interesting link as well. That because there's not been very many players that have done that, and the Patriots have one, and they're not too far back history.
Gronk did it like in long, sort of a Hail Mary
Oh
situation.
yeah, the Hail Mary safety
And then
situation. Yeah,
Julian Edelman may have played a little secondary as well because of injuries, if I recall correctly. But yeah, good call on that. All right, Ashton Jeanty. I don't know if you heard this. I said it yesterday on the show, but I asked him if any NFL teams mentioned his height. He said no one did. So I guess that's not an issue. But 3 teams, landing spots, none of the same. Finally, so I had the Panthers at number 1. I'm just saying stock up the roster with skill position players. I know they drafted Jonathan. What's the Texas? What running back last year that got hurt?
oh yeah, Jonathan Brooks.
Jonathan Brooks. He tore his ACL again, which stinks for him. So I'm just like
Yeah,
keep
they did
keep it.
re-sign Chuba.
And they re-signed Chuba, but that's okay. You can do that. I had the Cardinals as well. James Conner's a little long in the tooth. He's playing at a high level. All these former Steelers, and then the Chargers. I think the Chargers just signed Najee Harris, so they
Mhm.
have some depth there. So this was before that signing. You have the Raiders, the Bears, and the Cowboys. We've talked the Cowboys to death. So let's do the Bears. Let's talk about what the Bears you think makes sense for Ashton Jeanty, Caleb Williams, and I'll tell you quickly, they've bolstered the interior offensive line. Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson, and Joe Tooney. They signed Grady Jarrett. They signed Durham Smythe. So they are moving in the right direction offensively. And now I think DeAndre Swift's still under contract. I didn't think he had a great year last year, but Ashton Jeanty adds another element of awesomeness.
Yeah, and I think this is just a classic case of an organization setting themselves up to make a move like this because just a couple of days ago, I would have said the Bears have so many needs that they couldn't possibly consider taking a running back number 10 overall with the first round pick in Ben Johnson's tenure as the head coach. But what they've done over the past 24 hours, or even dating back to last week, I think it has opened the door for them to do just that. And for Ben Johnson to get his version of Jahmyr Gibbs.
Right,
Not
exactly.
only did they make all those additions to the offensive line, but they also signed Dayo Ode Ingbo to go along with those other moves that they've made on the defensive line. So they have essentially addressed most of their pressing needs, which allows them to make a move like this. And if you're looking to take pressure off of your young quarterback, a running back is a great way of doing that. And if you add the type of talent that they have along the interior, that's obviously going to create lanes for a guy like Ashton Jeanty. Now to the overall conversation of whether a running back should be taken in the top 10 overall. I think people have wanted to push Jeanty down the board a little bit. We've seen him last until the Broncos and the Steelers, and I think NFL teams are more accepting of the possibility of a running back being taken in the first top 10 picks than a lot of people would believe, because there have been years with Bijan and Jameer where a lot of people thought that those players could last into the 20s and they were taken much earlier. So
8 and
I think
12.
his market, yeah, I think his market's going to start earlier than people expect. And that's kind of why I put the Raiders on here as well,
Yeah.
since they've gone out and made the move for Geno.
Yeah. And I love that as well, just to give Geno some weapons. Our buddy Pete Prisco whinges about how Geno's never thrown more than 21 touchdowns and had 15 interceptions last year. He got hit in the mouth last year more than every other quarterback combined, not named Caleb Williams. I think the offensive line's better in Las Vegas, and a weapon like Jeanty is intriguing to say the least. Next up, the guy who Strikers currently wearing the T-shirt of, Tyler Warren, tight end. I had the Colts, the Broncos, and the Chargers. The Colts and Broncos are sort of layups, and you can even say lazy if you want. Fair enough. You had the Rams, the Seahawks, and the Broncos as well. He feels like a Jim Harbaugh type pick, in line, but he can line up anywhere. But he'll block his ass off, and then he's just a security blanket, not just in the middle of the field, but pretty much anywhere for Justin Herbert. And then you have the Rams, which I sort of like. He feels like a Ram as well. And then maybe even Seattle. Like, I don't even know. Is Noah Fant still under contract in Seattle? I'm trying to think who their tight ends are. He feels like a guy that you
Yeah.
bring in right away to be maybe an upgrade over TJ Hawkinson with what Sam Darnold had in Minnesota. So talk a little bit about Seattle as a fit for Tyler and Sam.
Yeah, there's the tight end position, I think, is a need for what they want to do on that side of the ball. Mike McDonald coming from Baltimore, they had Mark Andrews. Coming from Michigan, they had Colston Loveland, and before that, they had the other tight end. Where'd he end up going? Dallas, maybe?
Oh yeah, I can never remember his name. I liked him coming out.
Yeah. They had a couple of guys at the tight end position. So the tight end position has always been a part of the offenses that he has been around. And now that you've traded DK Metcalf,
Schoonmaker.
I don't think that you necessarily Schoonmaker, yes. I don't think you necessarily have to make it a 1-for-1 trade. I don't think you have to go out and get a wide receiver just because you traded DK Metcalf. I think there's other ways that you could supplement that offense. Yeah, it would be great to add both. But I think adding a player like Tyler Warren also gives you some dynamic ability in the pass game, because you can move around and do some different things with him. So I think that team wants to be physical, and the offensive line still has to be addressed. But I just think if you're looking to supplement that unit with players capable of making plays down the field, Seattle makes a lot of sense for Tyler Warren.
Yeah, don't overthink it. I mean, the Raiders were out of QB options last year, so they had to quote unquote settle for Brock Bowers, and he was the best player on planet Earth. So 18, could Tyler Warren be there? That's when Seattle picks. That feels about the range. A little earlier, he could perhaps go off, maybe a little later. Again, Brock Bowers went 13. Is Brock Bowers 5 picks better than Tyler Warren in a vacuum? Maybe, but we'll see what team needs are. And again, no one zigs more than John Schneider when everyone thinks he's going to zag when it comes to personnel. So that is always exciting. I've talked about it before. Like the Steelers, you can sort of figure out 2 months in advance what they're thinking about. You never know what the Seahawks are going to do. All right, finally, before we take one more break, one of my favorite players in this draft class. I wonder how many times I say that over the course of the draft cycle, but I really do love Matthew Golden, the Houston transfer. My comp for him was Jordan Addison. We talked about it yesterday on HQ, Josh, where the conversation was going to be Isaiah Bond coming into the season, and Matthew Golden just decided to take over. Bond was banged up a little bit. Top 3 landing spots, my Pittsburgh Steelers, the Buffalo Bills, and the Bills have made some moves. They signed Josh Palmer. I love that signing for them. I love Josh Palmer. I think he's such a good, underrated player. The Bills didn't lose Matt Collins. We saw he signed with the Patriots. They extended to Khalil Shakir. Just make sure I'm not missing anything here. They moved on from Von Miller. So that's basically all they've done on the opposite side of the ball besides rejiggering, if you will, Josh Allen Steele, give him more money. And then the Rams I had, if they're moving on for Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua and Matthew Golden, I'll sign up for that. You had the Seahawks as a target. We just talked about why it could be wide receiver or tight end. The Dallas Cowboys and the 49ers. I'm trying to think here. How do we want to do this? How do you like the idea of him in Buffalo They have Khalil Shakir, who's a similar size player. He might be a little bigger, but Matthew Golden, like I mentioned, Jordan Addison, in terms of his ability to win down the field. And I think that's something they've been lacking, especially when you compare that with last year's early second round pick, Keon Coleman. How do you like that fit there for that offense?
One thing I like about essentially each of these fits is that he doesn't necessarily have to go in and be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And with Buffalo, you have Khalil Shakir, you have Keon Coleman to where the ball can be spread out a little bit. He doesn't have to be a high volume producer in year one for that offense. Josh Allen is not going anywhere. Obviously, he signed the most guaranteed money in NFL history recently with his newest contract extension. So you always know that you're going to get more out of that wide receiver position than other teams would be capable of doing. So yeah, I think it would be a good fit. I think just looking at what they already have in the room, that would be a good complementary skill set to what they have there, similar to Dallas, where you already have CD Lamb. So you're
Right.
getting some more one-on-one opportunities. San Francisco, there's some real buzz that they can move on from Brandon Ayuk as well. So if you're talking about moving on from Debo and Ayuk in the same offseason, you're going to have to supplement that unit with another player or two. Last year, of course, they drafted a guy in the first round, but you're going to need more at that position. So I think in that situation, Matthew Golden comes into play for them. Los Angeles did go out and sign Devontae Adams, so they do have Puka there and Devontae. So it's not necessarily the most pressing need for them anymore. But I do wonder, just Devontae with 2 years left on his contract, if maybe they would take a Matthew Golden and just kind of stash him and be the future of the position.
By the way, for the 49ers, moving on from everyone, trade up and get Travis Hunter. You're filling a bunch of needs with one player. It is wild that Debo's gone. Ayuk was almost sort of gone last year during the lead up to the preseason before he signed that deal. Then, of course, towards ACL. And I don't know if that team's rebuilding or not, but they feel like they're in a weird place and they're trying to figure some things out. All right, we're going to take another quick break here. When we come back, we'll wrap this thing up with our final four guys, 3 defensive guys, and 1 more quarterback. Talk about that right after this.
Sail GP lands in California. The Port of LA welcomes the 12 world-class teams to the epicenter of glitz, glamour, and Hollywood.
All right, Josh, down the home stretch here. First up, Jalon Walker, linebacker / edge out of Georgia. We talked to him at the combine. Awesome, fantastic human being. Also, great singing voice, which I didn't know. Debo uncovered that in his research, and he was actually surprised that we stumbled across that, but also a fantastic football player. All right, Striker, what do we got? What are the 3 teams here? You and I both had the Panthers, Josh. We both had the Falcons because the Falcons, as you noted yesterday, perpetually need edge rush help. And I mentioned the 49ers. Drake Greenlaw just signed elsewhere. They have Fred Warner, of course. They moved. No, that was the other Bosa. The other Bosa got sent home from the Chargers, so he's a free agent. Nick Bosa is still obviously part of the 49ers. But I like him in San Francisco because, as we've been talking about, they have needs everywhere. And then the Cardinals. And the Cardinals make sense, too. They had Darius Robinson last year who was banged up, their edge rusher who outweighs Jalon Walker probably about 50 pounds. Let's talk about the Panthers because we both have them, and they're a team that feels like, I don't know if they're turning the corner, they're approaching the corner, and I feel like they're in probably the best spot they've been in recent memory. What does he do for that defense that moved on from Brian Burns last year and sort of struggled with personnel at the very least and some injuries a year ago?
I think it gives them a youthful infusion at the position. Jadeveon Clowney was kind of their main pass rusher this past season, which is obviously more of a Band-Aid than it is a long-term solution. So I think just giving them a player like Jalon Walker, who's incredibly quick, can shoot the gap, get on the hip of blockers, and just move the quarterback off the spot would be a very much needed contribution from what they have seen in recent years. Because like you noted, they kind of pillaged the defense to surround Bryce Young with all of this talent on offense to help facilitate his success. Now you have to reinvest those assets into the defense if you're trying to build a well-rounded team. So Jalon Walker, I think, is a player that is going to be very polarizing. I don't think he's a fit for everybody. I mean, the Saints, the 49ers, those teams have typically looked for the prototypical 6'5", 260 to 270 pound pass rushers. But I think for a team like the Falcons and the Panthers, you're able to make concessions a little bit as long as those players are still very capable of rushing the passer. And I think Walker is. So just dropping him in there in that Carolina defense, allowing him to do what he does best, which is rush the passer. I think that's a good fit for his skill set.
Yeah, he should not be polarizing. Again, I just bring it back to the Brian Branch conversation. We're just overthinking things. Dude can ball out. He's still young. He's not. They pick 8, the Carolina Panthers. That's not too high for me. And another name, I mentioned Brian Burns. The other name that I always come back to, Frankie Louvu is an absolute wild man. He obviously signed with Washington after leaving Carolina, and that void was sort of hard to fill. They didn't just re-sign they signed Trevon Moehrig from the Raiders. The Carolina Panthers did. They got Bobby Brown along the defensive line. They got Tarshawn Wharton along the defensive line. They re-upped J.C. Horn. They signed edge rusher Patrick Jones. So to your point, they are moving in the direction of trying to make that defense better than it was. So we shall see. Come on, Bryce Young. All right, next up, Will Johnson, turf toe, sidelined him pretty much the second half of the season. He came into the summer as the number 1 player on my board. A cornerback has never been drafted first overall, and unless you want to count Travis Hunter, should it happen this year, it ain't going to happen. Will Johnson has not worked out. I'm not sure what his pro day plans are. I don't know if you've heard, Josh, if he's still going to be banged up from that, but we have no idea how fast he is. We've seen him play. He plays fast enough. The comp for him is Pat Surtain Jr. He's just not going to run as fast as Patrick Surtain, who ran with 4.4s, I believe. Here's our list. We both had the Saints at number 1. Number 2, the Steelers. Like, if he's sitting there, and this is sort of the Joey Porter conversation, who Joey ran in the 4.5s at the combine, and I know he's a little upset by that. First pick of the second round. If he'd run 4.4, he'd have gone in the first round. And stiff hips, yada, 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 whatever. He's been their cornerback 1. He does struggle with being too handsy at times. That's not an issue with Will Howard for me. And then the Packers are also on that list. I don't know if Green Bay's done anything. I know they haven't yet moved on from Jair, I don't think. Correct?
Not yet. That's something that will be done eventually. They did sign Nate Hobbs yesterday in free agency.
You got it.
He's got some inside-out versatility, but probably more destined to be in the nickel.
Yeah, according to Striker Notes, Will Johnson ain't going to participate in his pro day on March 21st because of a minor hamstring injury. He's going to hold some private workout for teams on April 14th, which is 10 days before the draft. So turf toe during the season, hamstring now. Who knows, man? It doesn't. It's frustrating, but I don't think it changes who he is as a player. You have the Jets on there too, I should know, and the Jets have done a ton of stuff. Rick single-handedly trying to save that franchise. Let's see what the Jets have done. Justin Fields, we've talked about. They re-upped Jamie Sherwood. Brandon Stevens was an interesting signing, the long corner, formerly of the Ravens. And they signed Andre Sisco, former Syracuse guy, former Jacksonville Jaguar. So let me ask you this. Not so much a team-centric thing. I'm going to say it's 17.5. Over-under. Does he get drafted before 17.5 or after 17.5? Will Johnson.
I think he gets drafted before.
Okay.
And you're asking the wrong person because I am still probably the president of the Will Johnson fan club.
You should be.
I'm buying into the fact that what I saw in 2023 is more of the player that he can be than what he was this past season when he was dealing with nagging injuries.
Yep.
The long speed is a question, which I think teams are going to need to be answered because that is incredibly important for the cornerback position. Not so much in, just being able to mirror up the boundary, but also recovery. If you are to gamble or if you are to get caught leaning on a double move, if you have that recovery speed, that's something that teams really covet because you're moving backwards most of the time, whereas the wide receivers are moving forward. So you're inherently at a disadvantage. So you have to have that long speed that's going to allow you to recover from your mistakes at times. And I think
but there's no tape of Will Johnson getting torched consistently. There's no tape.
No. And, I think it's just the difference in whether or not he's a player taken in the back half of the first round or a player taken in the first half of the first round, because I don't think anybody anticipates he's going to run a 4.6, which would be slow for a cornerback. But I think people believe that it's possible he runs a 4.5. And if he runs, a 4.59 or a 4.58 or whatever, then I think suddenly there's an opportunity for a Jade Barron to leapfrog him in the pecking order, in which case Johnson could be available in the second half of the first round.
Yeah. Jade
But
Barron
if he
has
comes out,
leapfrogged Will Johnson for me. I just love Jade. He ran
yeah,
a 4.39, I think.
and that's fair with the questions that we have about Johnson. But if he comes out and he runs in the 4.4s, to me, he's a top 10 pick.
Who was I
I just think
talking
he's
to
that
about this?
caliber of player.
The other thing is they have all the GPS data, and I mentioned Brian
Yeah.
Branch, and I also have to remember to mention um, who's the safety for the Ravens from Notre Dame that ran a 4.7? Kyle Hamilton. And then he reran it at the pro day and did whatever, ran a 4.5. I don't know what he ran. It doesn't matter. He's good. You know how fast these guys play. So I think we just have so much time on our hands. We have to look for reasons not to like these kids. And to your point, I'm glad you're sticking with your Will Johnson guns because he's a really good football player. And there's a reason he was my number one player of the summer. And there's a reason he was drawing comps to Patrick Surtain. I talked to teams that actually like Christian Gonzalez a little better coming out, but I know Christian Gonzalez, he didn't interview poorly, but some teams question whether he was really locked in, laser focused, meatheady enough for football. He's fine. Again, we're
And
thinking.
the
Go
one
ahead.
thing that I'll add before we move on is I learned a lesson when Derek Stingley Jr. came out because he had been dealing with his own injuries. He wasn't available that last season in Baton Rouge. And he kind of fell a little bit more than maybe what his talent suggested that he should have. And he's been a good player in the NFL. So, I'm holding firm in what I know Will Johnson can be, but I also know that some teams are not going to be as forgiving as what I have been.
Yeah, Stingley, you mean he fell in the minds of like the media folks? Because he was
Yeah,
drafted before Sauce.
yes, yep. He kind of fell down the board.
Right.
For media folks, a lot of people were projecting him into the teens.
Right.
And then he ultimately gets taken earlier than what
Yeah.
many had
And
expected.
the Texans crushed that one. And at the time, the conversation, because I remember having this conversation at the Senior Bowl. I was talking to a scout. I said, could Sauce be better than Stingley? I was like, yeah, maybe. And that sort of momentum built. And they were both good players. But I think in terms of consistently being good players, I think Stingley probably has the edge now. By the way, I was thinking about your guy and my guy, Joe Hayden. He ran 4.52 at the combine. I remember that hurt him back in 2010. He played for 12 years. He's a really good player. So I thought he ran slower than that. Maybe he ran again, but whatever. I don't care. He's a good player. Let's stop overthinking it. All right, next up, Mike Green. My comp for Mike Green, Will Anderson Jr. I think he plays with that sort of motor. Edge rusher out of Marshall, transferred from UVA, went to high school in Williamsburg, Virginia, the very same high school, Lafayette High School, as Lawrence Taylor. Lawrence Taylor turns out it's pretty good. Here are our landing spots. Carolina Panthers, again, we've talked about that. Chicago Bears. I love the idea of getting, I think you had Mike going to Chicago in your latest mock draft as well, opposite to Mr. Sweat there. That makes a ton of sense. And then the Falcons, we've talked them to death. And you have the Falcons, the Bengals, and the Cardinals. Let's talk Cincinnati because we haven't talked them at all today. Trey Hendrickson, it's that time of year where he requests a trade. I think Sam Hubbard has one more year left on his deal, but he hasn't been quite
He
the player.
retired.
Holy moly, he retired?
He retired.
He must have done that when I was under anesthesia. All right. So that's another need for them. I think Joseph Asai, I think they re-upped him. I think I saw that. I'll double check. But talk about here's how I sort of couch these conversations for AFC North teams. Would I be happy as a Steelers fan if Mike Green was in Cincinnati? No, I would not. So talk to me about that.
Well, I think Trey Hendrickson is going to get moved. I don't think there's a lot of momentum for a deal right now. I think they're more motivated to bring back those wide receivers. And with each passing day, that becomes more expensive. So you have even less money to potentially throw at Trey Hendrickson. So I think at some point, the resolution that we see in his trade request is that he is ultimately traded, which means that you've lost Sam Hubbard, you've lost Trey Hendrickson. There is some optimism in Cincinnati that Miles Murphy will be more of the player that they had expected him to be when they took him in the first round. But even in that event, you need a player opposite Miles Murphy. And Joseph Asai is a good player, but even the contract that they gave him, which was a modest deal, I don't think that they even necessarily expect him to be, the long-term solution to their pass rushing issues.
1 year, $7 million to your point.
Yeah. So, even in the event that, Miles Murphy does break out, I think you need another pass rusher.
Absolutely.
They've made a couple of moves at defensive tackle. They brought back B.J. Hill. They did sign another defensive tackle, and I can't remember who it is off the top of my head here, but I
DJ,
think
TJ Slayton.
TJ Slayton, yes, couple run stuffing interior defenders. So I think being able to apply a pass rush specifically from the edge is more of a need than defensive tackle even at this point. So for me, that's why the Bengals have kind of jumped out as a edge rusher needy team.
Yeah, and they've re-upped Mike Gesicki because we've had conversations about whether Colton Loveland or Tyler Warren makes sense there. I don't know why you're paying or you are going to pay your two receivers $4,000 trillion. That doesn't make sense to me, but
Yeah.
whatever. That's
And I
not my
thought Eric All looked good for them too at tight end last year. So
and he tore his
they've got some
ACL again.
bodies. True.
He's out
Very
again,
true.
so that's unfortunate for him. And they have a ton of tight ends. Tanner Hudson, they just re-upped. Drew Sample, and then, of course, they re-upped Gesicki. Tanner McLaughlin, who I loved out of, I believe he was an Arizona kid, but he didn't play a lot last year. But to your other point, if they move on from Hendrickson, as you noted, they have Miles Murphy and Joseph Asai, and that's it. Like, that's literally who they have. And that is a huge gaping need. And you can blame Lou Anarumo all you want. He's now gone. Who's they hire as a new DC? Do we know?
Yes, it's Al Golden.
Al Golden. Okay, so
Yes.
he's got to work some magic. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I love the idea of, oh my gosh, Mike Green there. He'd be in right away. And I think as Jacqueline D'Agostino mentioned yesterday, he had 17 sacks last year. He's a hair on fire guy all day long. All right, finally, best for last question mark, Jaxson Dart. So, we've all watched these quarterbacks to death. I'm going back and watching them again because, you get through so many players, you sort of forget what you liked about them or what you didn't like. And we talked to Jaxson Dart at the combine. He's a solid guy, Star Wars guy, so he gets points for that. Teammates love him. I talked to like 2 or 3 of his teammates, and they all said positive things about who he is because last year's Ole Miss team had a ton of guys in from NIL and transfer, and he did a really good job of bringing those guys together. But he also is as tough as they come. All right, who we got here, Striker? Yes, sir. Pittsburgh Steelers, number 1 on my list. You have your Cleveland Browns, number 3 on your list. The Giants and the Titans. And for the Titans, for me, Josh, that would be pick 35. For the Giants, it would be pick 34. So if they want to go another direction and perhaps fingers crossed or maybe trade up a few spots and get the 5th-year option if they get back to the first round, that's what I was thinking there. You mentioned the Jets and the Browns. Let's talk about the Steelers because this might be a better solution. We talked about Shedeur Sanders and being it cost prohibitive to trade up, and I agree with that. I think at this point you can talk yourself into anything when you're a fan with no QBs in the QB room. How do you like the idea of taking Jaxson Dart at 21 if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, or maybe trading back a few spots, 25, 26, and getting them there? And I wouldn't start him right away. Maybe you bring in, I don't know, Daniel Jones, bring Russ back. I don't care, for a year or two. How does that wet your whistle?
I like it as long as they bring in a veteran option into that quarterback room. Jaxson Dart, there's a lot to like about him. Leadership qualities, everything that I've heard, he's incredibly smart. He's a sponge when it comes to learning the playbook. At the same time, I think coming from that offense, he's going to probably need a little bit more time to, kind of understand how to go through his progressions and reading out the field, stuff like that. So I would probably feel best if he were given an opportunity to learn for a year before I thrust him into the conversation. But if you bring in a veteran quarterback and allow him to do that, I think it's a great fit because the more I kind of hear about the player, the more I'm not only intrigued, but optimistic that he can be an NFL team solution for quite some time. I think he could be an NFL starter in this league. Just everything that I've heard about what he's made up of mentally, his toughness, everything of that nature. I think he checks a lot of boxes. So, and this is part of a larger conversation because Cam Ward is quarterback 1, and then I think it could just about be anybody. I don't know what that gap is going to be between Cam Ward and the second quarterback taken. And realistically, the Browns, the Titans, or the Giants are going to get that player. And then beyond that, we've kind of talked about it a little bit with Shedeur. There's only a handful of teams with a clear present need at the quarterback position, and we've talked about them a lot already. So I think when you're talking about the back end of the first round or possibly top half of the second round, there's that same handful of teams that are going to be in that conversation, which could ultimately benefit Jaxson Dart because, somebody's going to have to move up to get him if they want that player. Or some people may feel comfortable with Tyler Shuck from Louisville as well. So
No,
it's a really interesting
we're not going to have that
conversation.
conversation. We're not having the Tyler Shuck conversation. I don't know what planet we're on and what drugs we were smoking. And no disrespect to Tyler Shuck. If he goes into the top 50, someone has made a grave mistake.
And you and I see eye to eye on that when we've talked about it, off camera, just about that kind of whole situation. But, there are fans of his around the league. So it's going to be a part of the conversation, whether it's warranted or not.
Yeah, it feels like the gaslighting I was going through with the Will Levis stuff. And Will Levis, I could see, you could sell me on Will Levis, the athletic, the physical stuff and all that, and maybe you get him inside the top 15. Fair enough. Like the Tyler Shuck stuff, he's going to be 26. He's had a ton of injuries. I get it. Like he literally had 24 drops last year that weren't his fault. Like, he's throwing the ball against the wall and no one's catching it. I understand that. But I don't. And again, I'm not trying to crush the kid. I'm just trying to be realistic about draft expectations.
I just realized
ahead.
the funniest thing that could happen this offseason is if the Titans take Cam Ward and then they move on from Will Levis. Where could he go?
Oh, he'll go in Pittsburgh and Arthur Smith will save his career. Get the Tennessee Titans gang back together.
You're already talking yourself into it?
I will talk myself into anything at this point.
You've dug in so hard against Levis because Prisco has dug in
that's the only
in
reason.
favor of him.
100%. That's the only reason. I preface a lot of my things by saying I don't want to dump on Will Levis and then no, I think his family. He's a super nice kid, super smart. I wish him all the success in the world, and I have to tune out Pete Prisco. I think it's a lesson there. All right. That's all we got. Oh, I know what I want to ask you quickly. Speaking of Tyler Shuck, I know my answer. What's your answer? If you had to take a quarterback, I don't care where, and the choice was Dylan Gabriel or Tyler Shuck, who are you taking?
I'd take Dylan Gabriel.
Me too, 100%. All right, that's what I wanted to get you on the record for. All right, that's it. Episode 229 in the books. Today is Tuesday, March 11th, and I say that because Josh and I will be back tomorrow on March 12th, and we're going to do a mock draft on CBS Sports Network and also on the podcast. And then we'll be back Thursday as well. I'm not even sure what we're doing then, but it's go time, boys. So thanks to all you guys who watch and listen and comment. Thanks for sticking through the wisdom teeth stuff. Thanks to Josh and Renner for all their help. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.